The Secret Life of Dad.
Daddy made a podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Secret Life of Dad's podcast with myself, Lawrence, and Simmone Lewer. Hello, Simmone.
Hi.
How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm very good, thanks.
Thank you for coming on. So today's episode, one part of this, when we started the Secret Life of Dads, is that we wanted to kind of find out about subjects beyond our realm of knowledge. And for us, gestational diabetes is something that I live with type 1 diabetes, but I knew nothing about. When my wife became pregnant, she said, I've got to go for my gestational diabetes test. And I was like, what's that? So I thought, wouldn't it be good to get somebody on who knows this world really, really well, to give dads the tools, the utensils to better cope with being able to help their partners going through pregnancy. So, Simmone, would you like to first of all just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your story?
Mm-hmm. So my name's Simmone Lewer. I'm a dietitian and I've been working as a dietitian for over 13 years now. You might detect an accent, but I am from Australia originally, but I have been in the UK since 2012. I decided to go and start my career working with Aboriginal people in Australia. So I would spend my days travelling out to remote communities on a light aircraft or driving like 8 hours forward driving, camp the week in the remote community and help mothers who were pregnant or had diabetes and early childhood nutrition, and help them to eat better and give their children a better start to life. And that's what sparked my passion for wanting to work in diabetes in pregnancy, because you could see the impacts that good nutrition could have on the mums that had some support, and the impacts that would happen if they didn't have much help or if they weren't eating very well. And you could see it at school, like those children, their developmental delays, if they had any fetal alcohol syndrome. And it's amazing the impact that nutrition can have on before you fall pregnant, during pregnancy, and that first sort of 1,000 days. You might have heard that term before, of nutrition at the start of life. So yeah, that sparked my interest, seeing all that and working out there.
I was not expecting you to say that. I thought you were going to go, I just went down to university, kind of fell into it, and you're flying into parts of like the Northern Territory. And so whereabouts were you in Australia then?
So I was based in Alice Springs for this job, and I worked out of Tennant Creek and all around those areas. The area I serviced was actually the size of England, the Barkly region.
Because I've been to Kakadu, and there's not much there.
Yeah.
We were in Kakadu. That's Darwin, right?
Yeah, up near Darwin, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. What a story.
Yeah.
That's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So how did you end up in the UK?
So then I went and wanted to travel and earn the pound, obviously. At the time was really, really good. And so I registered myself to work in the UK, came over and, did it for a couple of years and then ended up staying. So...
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought I had a lot of questions coming into this podcast, and now I've got all of a sudden 10 times more questions about it. I mean, again, like gestational diabetes, it's a tongue twister. I find it even hard to pronounce.
Should we just call it GD?
Yeah. I know nothing about it. I know very little about it. So I'm a complete novice. I'm an open book, a blank canvas. So to explain it, I suppose, in the most basic terms for someone like me, how would you explain gestational diabetes?
So it's a type of diabetes that we only get in pregnancy. So usually it's where there's some sort of carbohydrate intolerance, and it's where the body's ability to keep our blood sugars stable doesn't happen as well compared to when we're not pregnant. When we're pregnant, because of the hormones that women have when they're pregnant, we get a lot of insulin resistance. And everybody that is pregnant will have some sort of insulin resistance. And the insulin resistance increases the more we get on throughout the pregnancy. So for someone that has gestational diabetes, their ability to eat carbohydrates and break down the sugars that are in carbohydrates isn't as good as somebody who doesn't have gestational diabetes, but they will still have a little bit of trouble. So everybody needs to keep their blood sugars balanced in pregnancy. So today we're obviously talking just about gestational diabetes, but any woman that is pregnant and any dad that has a pregnant, partner, then this is all very relevant, because unfortunately today the rates of gestational diabetes are increasing. In the UK, 1 in 10 women have gestational diabetes, and it affects up to about 14% and probably more of pregnancies. So we're seeing a big rise. And often what happens is people are getting diagnosed in pregnancy because it's the first time they're having blood tests and things. But a lot of the time, unfortunately, we see there's already some pre-existing diabetes going on, but it hasn't been picked up. So that can be one thing that can happen too.
So this is my next question about the onset of gestational diabetes and how that occurs essentially, and then potential signs to look out for.
So the onset, I guess, is you can have pre-diabetes and not know, but then when you fall pregnant, you go see a doctor, you have some blood tests around 7 or 8 weeks, and they'll check your fasting blood sugar at that point. And that's where we might pick up if it's out of the reference range or it's a bit higher. That would be like the first red flag. And then what would happen is if that's fine, then women usually get screened around 22 to 28 weeks, and they'll have something called an oral glucose tolerance test, which is what you were talking before about, Matt, with your...
Yeah, do you know what I have? I carry these tablets with me everywhere I go. So I remember where's the camera? I remember my wife going in and she had to ingest a whole packet of these before her test.
Oh, interesting.
So she was bouncing off the roof.
Wow.
So I take these in case I have a hypo, but she was just taking these just to see if she had gestation. So yeah. So she had these, but she was all good. She was all good.
She was fine.
She was okay. Yeah.
So most of the time it's a drink that they would have that they'd have to consume. It's about 75 grams of
is it really a drink?
carbohydrate.
She's got to chew on these tablets.
my
I just told that
goodness.
to her as a joke because I know you've got to eat all these tablets.
Yeah. Yeah, so then they would see if they pass it. Unfortunately, in the UK, not everybody has this test, only if you have certain risk factors. Whereas in other countries like Australia, some places in Europe, everybody gets screened. And that's partly to do with funding and the NHS and things.
So what sort of percentage of women in the UK at the moment will have gestational diabetes going through pregnancy?
So 1 in 10.
1 in 10,
Yeah.
you said. Wow,
Yeah.
that's a lot, isn't it?
And it's probably higher than that.
Really?
Because their stats are a couple of
Okay.
years old now, yeah.
So without the testing, are there symptoms or signs to look out for in terms of...
Sure.
Yeah.
So you can have some risk factors that would flag on your medical notes that you might be at risk of getting gestational diabetes. So if your mother had it, if you have any diabetes in your family, that would put you at a higher risk. Your age, your weight before you fall pregnant. So if your BMI is higher, if you had a history of polycystic ovarian syndrome, there's probably some other risk factors that I can't remember, but that would be like the first thing. So then they're like, okay, you have a risk factor that might put you in this sort of box of gestational diabetes. But unfortunately, there's also a lot of people that have none of those red flags or risk factors. Let's just go back a step and talk about symptoms. Often and not, there's no symptoms. It might be, like diabetes symptoms, really thirsty, peeing a lot, feeling a bit shaky, feeling unwell, lots of other things. But in pregnancy,
Would a lot of
we feel
women just
all
put
of
that
that.
exactly,
Yeah,
right?
we feel all
Yeah,
those
yeah.
things anyway. So, yeah, it is quite hard to know. Yeah, yourself.
Yeah. And yet there are, repercussions potentially for the development of the babies we were talking about earlier on. So extremely important that people are asking, I suppose, to be tested if it's not something that naturally happens.
Yeah. So they'll check their fasting level will be checked. So there might be like when you have a blood test, they'll sort of screen that, but it can still be like fine, and then they still might have gestational diabetes and not know. So that's why it's very important that all the nutrition information that, or the tips that I might share today, or anybody that's pregnant actually has some support from a dietitian to make sure that they're eating really well in their pregnancy, because we know that if you can eat really well in pregnancy before you're pregnant, and even men, if they can eat really well before conception occurs, all of those things can have a massive impact on the baby's future health. We call this epigenetics. So we know that the genes and how healthy the sperm is, how healthy the egg is before you fall pregnant, at least 3 or 6 months before you decide to have a baby. And then during those early phases of pregnancy, there's so many things we can do that can keep us healthy to reduce the risk of complications like gestational diabetes or other things like preeclampsia or having a large for gestational age baby. Nutrition has such a big role there. And I guess in my ideal dream would be that every single person sees a dietitian when they want to start trying for a baby, a fertility specialist dietitian, or if they have any diabetes, a diabetes, pregnancy dietitian, and get that support.
Are there certain foods that can help with fertility?
Yes.
There really are?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Come on, what foods?
Yeah. So, for example, if we talk about dads here, so having a diet that's really high in shellfish and seafood.
I thought you were about to say sugar.
Omega-3 fats,
Yeah.
those things are real, and zinc is another one. So they're found in your shellfish. Those foods are really great for healthy sperm production. And, for example, say there was some infertility issues and you went and had your sperm checked and you found some problems. Nutrition can fix so much of those issues. And sperm lives for about 72 days. So if then you have your check, 72 days of eating really well, seeing a fertility dietitian, making some great goals, you can come back and have much better markers on all your sperm results. Same with egg health as well, a woman's egg health. So fertility and nutrition have a massive role in fertility. Yeah.
Wow.
So what you're saying is if I eat lots of lobster, my sperm will be healthy and I have better odds of impregnating my wife. Why didn't I know this 8 years ago?
Yes. Yeah. So it plays a big role. And we're finding a lot more out about this now and about how much of an impact nutrition has before we fall pregnant. And it's not just the woman, we're seeing that a study was released recently about how the alcohol that a man consumes before before conception has impacts on fetal alcohol syndrome. So even if the wife doesn't, the partner or the mum doesn't have any alcohol, but the dad is drinking alcohol, that can still put a child at increased risk of fetal alcohol syndrome. So we're finding all this stuff out.
So what is fetal alcohol syndrome?
So fetal alcohol syndrome is where a child will be born and have developmental delays throughout their life because they might be born small for gestational age, they might be preterm, and it's where there's alcohol. Worst case scenario, it's where there's alcohol consumed during pregnancy by the mother. Okay. But now we're finding out that it can even be impacted from dad drinking before pregnancy.
What? So when do I, as a dad, need to cut out drinking?
So 3 months at least before conception, but
3 months.
ideally 6 months because you want to check your sperm health first,
Okay.
and then you want to have a few months up your sleeve to get everything.
Maybe we need
Maximised.
Lucky Saint as a sponsor of this.
I think so. I actually remember my kids are 8 and 5, and I remember around the time of conception thinking, I want to be as healthy as I can possibly be. I want to cut out drinking as much as possible and get really kind of into my training and get all my wellness pillars in place. So that's great to hear because
I think my mum used to drink Guinness when she was pregnant with me. Explains a lot.
There's a lot there to unpack in terms of fertility, nutrition. But going back to gestational diabetes, this research with the fetal alcohol syndrome, links us to think, well, if it's impacting that, then surely the health of the sperm before conception is also going to influence the risk of getting gestational diabetes and what dad is eating because, it takes two to tango and an egg is half sperm, half the egg, right? So all of that space we're definitely learning a lot more about. But in terms of, I guess the next thing might be about what else we can do to.
That's so interesting. Well, thank you for not leaving the dads out.
Yeah,
That's
I wasn't
really
expecting that.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've got a bit of work to do.
We have a little bit.
Yeah. Wow. Damn it. Okay.
It's such a big point, isn't it, as well? It's such a big point. And I remember actually, again, when in the early days of me with my friends and our friendship group trying, a lot of the dads would get together, ironically, in the pub, maybe around a few pints, and we were having exactly these kind of conversations because, you know, a lot of the dads just didn't know, you know, they wanted to go into this next chapter being as healthy as possible. So what you've just said there is absolute gold, right? Everyone stop drinking.
Get out of the pub.
Yeah.
And it is all obviously in moderation and everything, but I think it's just raising the awareness, right? That nutrition really does have a big role in fertility. If you're planning a pregnancy, if you're lucky enough that you can plan a pregnancy and, you know, things go to plan, which often they don't, but that, you know, there are steps we can do to make you as the dad and you as the mum as healthy as possible. So then you can give your baby the best outcomes. Like there's simple things. For example, you know, if dad's sperm, everything's healthy, he's eating really well, then during pregnancy, mum makes sure she's eating really well. Something like as simple as eating oily fish 3 times a week. Mothers of children of mothers who ate oily fish 3 times a week, the research found performed way better academically and cognitively at age 7 compared to mothers who didn't have any oily fish in their pregnancy because it impacts brain development so much. Wow. So there's just this like amazing little things like this that nutrition is having a role in.
What about supplements then if they're not kind of eating so much of it?
Yeah, supplements. Yeah, absolutely. So part of working with a dietitian would be to individualise a mum's nutrient needs and look at what her diet is. If she doesn't like eating salmon 2 or 3 times a week, for example, then it might be making sure she's on the right omega-3 supplement. With gestational diabetes, there are other nutrients that are really important to have during pregnancy to help keep blood sugars balanced. Having diabetes, you might know, there is a role of, for example, magnesium, which helps with insulin resistance, vitamin D, making sure that, myo-inositol is another supplement that can help with blood sugar regulation. So working with someone like me, a mother would come along, she'd be like, oh, I'm just taking, a prenatal vitamin, that's all, what else should I be doing? We'd do a full nutrition assessment, look at her diet, see where the gaps are, be like, okay, these are the vitamins I would recommend you to take because they're just other little tools that are going to help keep those blood sugars in range. Because what we don't want in gestational diabetes is the blood sugars to be constantly out of range. That is what then puts baby at risk and mum at risk of complications.
That was going to be my next question. So say somebody has been diagnosed with gestational diabetes, what impact can not looking after the blood glucose levels have on the baby?
Yeah, and this can feel really scary, especially when someone is newly diagnosed, or if you're listening to this and you have a wife that is newly being diagnosed. And unfortunately, I think this tactic of in the hospitals at the moment, it's like, well, you need to do this and make these changes, or X, Y, and Z is going to occur. And so first I'll talk about that, and then I'm going to talk about it doesn't have to be that way. So one of the biggest side effects that we see from poorly controlled blood sugars with gestational diabetes is macrosomia, which is where the baby is born really big or over like 10 pounds or 4.4 kilos. And that is because there's so much insulin resistance going on. So what happens is if mum's blood sugars are high, baby's blood sugars are high. So baby makes more insulin, which then causes more fat cells around its organs like its stomach and its other tissues, and the baby gets bigger and bigger. And that's obviously dangerous. It's dangerous to have a really big baby with birth. The next thing is if the baby's really big, that can lead to complications like shoulder dystocia, where it's hard for a baby to come out, so then it's more likely to have a cesarean. It can mean if the baby's blood sugars are constantly trying to keep its blood sugars balanced, and it's making its own insulin, and then when it's born and it hasn't got that connection to the mum's placenta, its blood sugars will be really low, and baby will end up having to stay in like the NICU unit for quite a while to get their blood sugars back balanced. If mum's blood sugars are really high during gestational diabetes pregnancy, then the baby is much more likely to develop diabetes even at as early as age 11. So, keeping your blood sugars balanced is so important, particularly your fasting blood sugar, which is what most of my clients struggle with the most, is that fasting blood sugar, which is the one you take when you first wake up in the morning. So you have to test 4 times a day. You have to finger prick test 4 times a day with gestational diabetes. usually 1 or 2 hours after meals, and then in the morning when you first wake up. And what can happen is if you don't keep that fasting blood sugar in range, that's where we see a lot of these complications occur, and mum's much more at high risk of developing type 2 diabetes as well if her blood sugars aren't well managed. Now, that is just the case for not well managed. A lot of women I work with get perfect blood sugars during their pregnancy, and they're able to keep their blood sugars balanced. They're able to have a very low risk birth. They're able to have a birth on a midwife-led unit without the consultant or all the complicated things that they need because they've stayed off medication. They've been able to keep their blood sugars balanced throughout their pregnancy, and they can go on and not be one of those statistics because unfortunately up to 50% of women go on to develop type 2 diabetes within 5 years of having gestational diabetes.
Wow. What's the likelihood if you have gestational diabetes, say with your first, what's the likelihood of you having it then again with your second?
Yeah, very high.
Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
very high. But again, I had a client, one of my clients, Beck, she had it, her first pregnancy, found out they tried. She started eating really well before conception, started working with me from week 5 of her pregnancy, and totally had a different experience during her pregnancy. Was able to avoid getting gestational diabetes.
That's amazing. And sorry, one other thing, just love diabetes.
No, please.
Are women offered continuous glucose monitors on the NHS now, or is it still finger pricks?
That was my next question anyway.
Was it?
Yeah. No, it was because you have one of these patches, right?
Yeah,
do,
right,
yeah.
What
And I
do
was
you
wondering.
I use a new company called Cybionics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Chinese company. But it's changed my control. Like it's changed. My vision is better. Everything is so much better because of it. But I was wondering, because of being able to use this technology has added years to my life. So are women in the UK, are they entitled to getting CGMs on the NHS during pregnancy?
Unfortunately, no.
No.
It's only been recently that women with type 2 diabetes can now get continuous glucose monitors during pregnancy. I think it'll happen potentially. And I went to a conference a month or so ago about pregnancy and diabetes, and there was a lot of chat there about how much better control women have who have continuous glucose monitors in pregnancy with type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. At the moment, for gestational diabetes, there's not much research on it, but I'm very pro continuous glucose monitors because you can see the trends and what's happening overnight. You can look at trends so much more. But saying that, there's also so much stress and so much going on in pregnancy that then having to have all this extra data available to you about what your blood sugars are doing may not be suitable for women, or, you know, if there's any kind of history of eating disorder, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Then,
Can I talk a little bit about stress in pregnancy? Because I know I get a bit of a glucose spike when I'm stressed. So obviously I imagine carrying a baby around for 9 months could be quite stressful. What impact or what would you advise women in terms of like stress management during pregnancy?
That's a really good question. And I'm glad you mentioned that stress impacts your blood sugars, because it is one of the biggest things that people don't realise or even consider that is impacting their blood sugars. For example, one of my clients recently came to me and she was so stressed. Every single meal choice she was having was stressing her out because she didn't know what to eat that was going to not spike her blood sugar, and she didn't want to go on medication. So in the UK, if you have more than kind of 3 high readings a week or 3 readings out of range, then, and there's a pattern over a couple of weeks, they'll want you to start metformin, and then they'll pop you onto insulin if the metformin isn't getting your blood sugars down. Now, a lot of women in pregnancy don't want to take medication, so there's a lot of motivation there to try and do everything we can to keep our blood sugars in range. Anyway, so this lady was so stressed, every food choice. We worked together for a couple of weeks. I took away a lot of that stress because, you know, I gave her meal plans, ideas constantly, gave her some confidence. She understood what was going to be good for her blood sugars, because everyone's different, unfortunately. There's no one diet fits all with gestational diabetes. And that was like, her diet wasn't even that bad. It was the stress that was causing her high readings, and just being able to have someone to be accountable to and to talk to every day if she needed, just that was what lowered her blood sugars. I think talking about stress is a really good thing that dads can help with mums that are pregnant. So any husband or dad to be out there, if you are around a pregnant woman or your partner is pregnant, then every day I want you to try and help her to do a stress reducing activity, whether that be encouraging her to have a hot bath, whether that be sitting down with her and doing 10 minutes of meditation, whether that be dancing in the kitchen after dinner, because we know moving after eating can help with blood sugar control. Whatever it is, that is a great way that you can support your partner to help keep her blood sugars balanced, whether or not she has diabetes or gestational diabetes in pregnancy, because we want to keep those stress levels low. And if there's some, the research shows us if we have some good support to help us with stress, and sometimes women don't prioritize themselves, and we don't, especially if it's a woman that's already got another child, the kids first, right? So that can be something dads can do, is really help a mum to, every day make sure she's doing something that's good for reducing her stress levels.
I used to have to do the old fingers through the hair a lot. Still to have to do like that. You find that relaxing?
Yeah, I do actually.
Yeah.
Too relaxing.
Pregnancy massage, that's a nice one.
Pregnancy massage.
Yeah.
This is the sort of stuff I love, because I think this is the kind of knowledge that we need as dads to be able to help our partners. Massage as it is.
Did you have to do a lot of massages or dancing?
No, so my wife had HG as well, so she was sick every single day.
Poor thing.
And I've spoken about this before, but that for her was horrendous. Yeah. So I'm glad that she didn't get gestational diabetes as well, because that would have been that would have sucked.
But it's true what you were saying earlier as well about, because I was just thinking as we were chatting earlier, there's so many, every time you go for a checkup every day, if you're suffering from something like that as well, there's so much to think and potentially worry about when you're going through pregnancies for both partners as well. But I was thinking about that earlier as well in terms of the managing the data around blood sugars and so on. Are there any kind of I don't necessarily always like the word hacks, but are there any kind of hacks to simplify a lot of this that people could take away?
Yeah, sure. So I think I had to think, before I came here and on the drive over, I was thinking, well, what are some things that everybody can do in pregnancy, but obviously that is relevant for gestational diabetes? And I think the biggest or easiest thing that everybody can do to help with blood sugars and keeping blood sugars balanced is making sure you're getting enough protein in your diet. And if you are going to eat carbohydrates, to not eat them alone. So if you're somebody that usually has, rice, for example, or plain toast, that is eating carbohydrates alone. So pairing your carbohydrates with some protein and some healthy fats. For example, at breakfast, if you usually just have some jam on toast, that is all carbohydrate. Can you have avocado and an egg on toast? So you're adding some healthy fats and you're adding some protein, and with, I guess, dads supporting women in gestational diabetes, I often hear my clients be like, I've got to cook myself this low carb meal, and then I've got to cook my husband something.
Like a
and then I've got
lasagna
to,
for my husband.
Yeah. Lasagna for
No,
my
I'll have
husband.
lasagna today.
No, they literally are. And I'm like, you poor thing. And then a separate meal for the kids, or this child only eats these foods. This child. So this might be another great way is the dads can eat what she has to eat throughout that time.
Yeah, suck it up, dads.
Yeah.
Come on.
It's one simple thing, when you're at work, eat what you want, but when you're at home, support her with the lower carb meals. So, for example, instead of having, it might be lasagna is a good. It's a great one if you quite like lasagna. I'm not sure how you go with lasagna and your blood sugars.
I don't really touch it, to be honest.
Yeah, so lasagna, it might be that she, replaces some of the lasagna sheets with some eggplant in her lasagna, or aubergines and roasted courgettes. And you might be sitting there being like, why has this lasagna got so many vegetables in it? But that's where, as a dad, you can just be like, this is great, and I'm supporting
This
you.
is lovely.
We are having a lovely dinner.
Supporting this
9
lower
more
carb.
months of eggplant.
I just remember, on the protein front, cooking meat. Let's say that normally one might have a medium rare steak or something, but just cooking everything through, like making sure everything was completely, like 10 times overcooked and then
Sure.
picking it back and going back. But it's so true that like cooking meals together is such a massive part of the journey for pregnancy, and as kind of in sync and supportive as possible that you can be, the better.
Yeah.
My next question, sorry, was with regards to the protein content,
Yes.
is there a particular target that should be met daily, or is it a bit more relaxed, just kind of having like a palm size amount with meals or something like that?
For pregnancy, yeah. So it's very individualized, and that is the benefit of working with someone like me rather than maybe just seeing a dietitian in the NHS, because I would do a full prenatal nutrition screening and a nutrition assessment and actually calculate a woman's protein requirements based on her exercise and her body weight before she fell pregnant, and lots of different factors. In general, though, if we want to do a bit of a ballpark figure, unfortunately, and this is another reason why I do what I do, is that guidelines take 10 years to get updated, and pregnancy nutrition is changing and evolving so much. So guidelines recommend around 75 grams of protein a day. That does not work for my gestational diabetes clients, and the more recent research is showing us that more likely 100 grams of protein a day for an average size woman is what we should be aiming for, and up to 130 grams at the later stage of pregnancy. Because if you think we are growing cells, and we are growing like a leg and a liver, and all of that requires protein and essential amino acids to make those things. So
It blows my mind every time I talk about creating a human inside yourself. It just blows my mind. I go down these rabbit holes of like, oh my gosh, this is incredible.
Are we able to? You touched on briefly exercise. Is there kind of like certain types of exercise that you'd recommend women doing during pregnancy? Exercises, or certain types of exercises to avoid? Because I find with my type 1 diabetes that any kind of prolonged, long, slow walk will bring my levels down. Anything like a high intensity, like an interval session or something, I'll get a bit of a cortisol spike from that, so my levels will go up. So what kind of, is there types of exercise that you'd recommend?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this is where it probably does differ a little bit compared to someone with type 1 diabetes and in pregnancy as well. I think in general, let's take this back a step to sort of everybody in pregnancy, and actually even back further a step. We know one of the biggest things that can help reduce the risk of gestational diabetes is being active. So doing enough exercise before conception. So 90 minutes at least of exercise a week, whether that be cardio or strength training. That is the biggest thing that can help reduce the risk of gestational diabetes for a woman. During pregnancy, it's very important that women continue to exercise or start exercising, because if you imagine pregnancy is like, giving birth is the marathon, you're not just going to show up to a marathon without doing any training, right?
You would. Dads would.
Women would not. We would plan, right?
That's such a good point.
That's great. I love that analogy. That's really, really
so
good.
you need to train for that marathon. And it's not only just for the birth, but it's like the postpartum recovery as well. And we know that women who exercise regularly during pregnancy have much faster recovery periods, have shorter labors, and less complications. So in terms of exercising for gestational diabetes, we recommend that you move after meals. So even if it's just for 15 minutes. And that's where dads can help. So it might be after dinner, let's put the music on and dance around the kitchen. Or after dinner, let's go for a walk together. Or I'm going to put the kids to bed, you go do your 15-minute strength training workout. The types of exercise that we find are most beneficial in terms of blood sugar management and in pregnancy is making sure there's a combination of cardio and strength training. So strength training in particular seems to be better researched and seems to keep blood sugars more steady, because obviously then you have more muscle mass, right?
The amount of times that we have conversations with amazing people like yourself, Simmone, and we always come back to one of the many benefits of exercise and training and lifting weight time and time again. And I absolutely love to hear that. Yeah. You mentioned dancing in the kitchen a few times, which is a big one. How about, so, you know, the option is to walk around the block or to dance. Can I combine the two? Can I dance around the block? And then and I'll add in a bit of resistance training every now and then. I'll do a few push-ups and squats, because this is what I do anyway. But I just want to clarify.
Remind me never to visit your block. It's not Jenny from the block, it's Lawrence from the block.
Sorry about that.
That was it.
That was just.
Can you go around the block?
Can I dance around the block?
You absolutely can.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any kind of hospital tips that we could give our partners? Maybe if our partners they do have gestational diabetes, we're going into hospital with them. Is there anything that we can do to help them during that period?
Do you mean like for appointments or when labour's coming?
When labour's coming.
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely snacks. Definitely, like, it's even more important than the clothes, packing the snack bag and making sure that there's lots of food and that dad doesn't eat all the snacks.
Damn it!
I'm so guilty.
I was. Yeah.
I ate some of our daughter's the rest of her dinner the other day, and my wife was like, "Why have you eaten the rest of her dinner?" I was like, "I'm hungry."
You have to pack double. That's why you have to account for it all.
So in terms of snacks,
Yes.
Wife's just about to go into labour. What snacks should I bring for her?
Yes, so you want some things that are easily digested during labour. It depends on so many factors, but you want to have things that are easy to. So it might be that you've packed a peanut butter sandwich, for example, or it might be that you've thrown in a few Baby Bells, some veggie sticks, some hummus, some crackers. You know, maybe some of those milk poppers. That's another easy one. Long life milk poppers. And this is something that I go through with my clients in my program. I give them a whole list. You know, this is your list. Give this to your husband. That's his responsibility. He will pack that for you, bring that to the hospital. And it's not even during labour. It's usually when baby's born. I know from my own experience, I was absolutely starving. And I was like, okay, can I have some food? And they brought me out a piece of white toast and it had jam on it. And I was, you know, like I hadn't eaten for 2 days. You know, if you have an epidural or have lots of medication during birth, you don't get to eat. And I was like, this is not going to cut it. And luckily, being a dietitian, I had my snack bag ready. But yeah, so it is, really important. So dads could probably be in charge of bringing snacks and food.
It's always the white piece of toast with butter, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're obsessed in the UK, aren't they?
I mean, it's like every time. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, packing food anytime you go to hospital is important. The other thing would be really important is with gestational diabetes, there's a risk of the baby going onto the NICU ward or there being complications. So making sure that encouraging a mum to do some colostrum harvesting, if that's something that they've talked to their doctor and their healthcare team about, at around 36 weeks. And that is where you collect some colostrum or like the liquid gold milk from the breast before the baby's born and putting it in syringes and putting it in the freezer. Then the freezer. Now that freezer bag has to come to the hospital. So that's something dads can maybe make sure they're also in charge of, you know, bringing that, keeping it cold, giving it to the midwives when they get there, making sure they've got that.
Oh God, there's a lot of pressure on dads to remember that snack. Did you remember the colostrum? No, I forgot the colostrum in the freezer.
Yeah, because that's important because babies can then have that and that will help regulate their blood sugar if there's any blood sugar problems. And if mums, you know,
great tip.
If mums had a cesarean or something, she's out of action and, you know, rather than them having to give the baby some formula, if you've got that colostrum there, that's way better. And we'll
stock up on the colostrum.
Blood sugars up.
Yes.
Is it okay to drink coffee whilst I'm pregnant?
That's a great question.
That is a question that one of the somebody. It's not me. I'm not pregnant.
I was going to say Matthew,
but that was a question somebody had. And I thought it was quite an interesting one.
So the recommendations currently are that you can have 200 milligrams of caffeine a day, and what that looks like is like one small standard cappuccino, and then maybe like a cup of tea, regular tea. So it's not actually quite a lot. And remember, there's also caffeine in like soft drinks like Coke. There's caffeine in chocolate. So it can easily go over that 200 milligrams a day. If you are trying for a baby or you are having any infertility issues, then it's actually recommended to try and not have very much caffeine at all to reduce that amount.
I'm a big caffeine guy, I have to say. Just to,
I am big with but I'm very like I get to 2:00 and That's my cutoff.
Oh yeah. Go hard in the morning, and maybe before a workout, and then
Yeah, my dad still has a milky coffee before he goes to bed.
Makes
It's
no
mental.
sense.
It
Makes no
makes no
sense.
that
Why do they do
generation.
that?
I'm like, Dad, why are you having a milky coffee? It's 10 o'clock. Helps me sleep, son.
yeah, well, when it helps you sleep, you've got to the other side of the threshold, haven't you?
Yeah. One thing also, are there any tips that you could give mums to be who might have their head down the toilet at the moment, who are just throwing up continuously, finding the first few weeks really, really tough?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I just want to, I'll answer this, but I also want to say that a lot of women that I work with are like, I got gestational diabetes because I was so sick in my first trimester and all I ate was toast or dry crackers. And that's why I must have this. Or my doctor told me I must have eaten so bad and that's why I have this. And I just want to take that away and reduce some of that guilt. Like, you did not cause yourself to get gestational diabetes. It is the placenta hormones and it's interfering with how well you can regulate your blood sugars. It is not your fault. And I think there's things we can do to reduce our risk of developing it, and there are things we can do with exercise and lifestyle and diet that can reduce our risk. But you didn't cause your gestational diabetes because you had nausea and vomiting throughout your first trimester and all you could eat was toast. However, there are things we can do, and we know that getting enough protein can reduce nausea. There's also supplements we can take that can help reduce nausea and then vomiting as well. And this is where it comes back to the importance of seeing a specialist pregnancy dietitian to help you with those things. Because also in pregnancy, every week changes. So what causes you to feel sick or throw up in your, 6 weeks will be different to what makes you feel sick at 9 weeks and want to throw up. So working with somebody to increase your diet variety, make sure you're still getting a bit of nutrition in there and you're not just living on carbs, can be really beneficial.
Is it true that letting your husband play golf reduces the chances of gestational diabetes? I just heard that somewhere. And I've always stuck to it.
I was waiting for a golf reference at some point. Any excuse.
So we do have a few questions. So I've got, if I have gestational diabetes, will it mean me or my baby gets diabetes in the future?
I think this is a really valid and worrying question that a lot of mums would have. So, as I mentioned earlier, the risk of developing type 2 diabetes is up to about 50% of women will go on to develop type 2 diabetes within 5 years. Now, that doesn't have to be you. I think gestational diabetes is like when you get a warning light on in your car. It's like a warning light that there is some sort of insulin resistance going on, whether that was happening before you fell pregnant or you're experiencing it now as your blood volume's increased and you're putting on weight and all of those things that also interfere with blood sugar regulation. And so I like to encourage women to use this opportunity and families, I guess, getting the dads back involved here to change their lifestyle while they're pregnant, to eat, to learn new habits, to learn how to cook from scratch, to learn how to eat healthy, to learn how to pair their carbs, how to get more protein in, how to eat more oily fish in their diet, whatever their goals may be, to I guess reduce that risk of type 2 diabetes or delay the development of type 2 diabetes. Now, we know that women who have high fasting blood sugars in pregnancy and uncontrolled diabetes, their children do have a much higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes, but it doesn't have to be the case. So if you can work with a specialist dietitian, if you can keep active, if postpartum, after baby's born, you can replenish your nutrient stores. I don't encourage women to lose weight in that 4th trimester or that first 12 weeks after baby's born. But again, eating really well, like especially because in that time, your nutrient requirements are even higher than what they were in pregnancy, especially if you're breastfeeding. And breastfeeding, let's just quickly chuck this one in here now.
Yeah, we haven't even touched breastfeeding yet.
Breastfeeding reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes by loads for mum and for baby. And every month that you can breastfeed for longer gives you a reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes. In fact, women that breastfeed for 2 years have a 50% reduction in developing type 2 diabetes compared to women who don't breastfeed for that long.
Wow.
So it has an amazing benefit there.
And then in terms of the diet of the mother during breastfeeding, and you talked earlier about combining protein with carbohydrates and so on, I heard it was important for carbohydrates to be consumed during breastfeeding, because if they drop too low, the baby can be put off the milk. Is that correct? Or is that another one of those myths that's out there?
I think what the point is here is that we need to make sure that if we are breastfeeding, that we're eating really well, that we're having a really nutritionally balanced diet. Gone are the days where, I think people are like, oh, you're breastfeeding, you can just eat whatever you want. We know that, things that we're eating influence babies' taste preferences. Breastfeeding and eating really well while you're breastfeeding can reduce the risk of a baby developing certain allergies. It can influence the risk of baby getting eczema and things like that as well. So, all of that has a role there with eating well during breastfeeding too. Okay. Again, more the reason to work with a dietitian postpartum, in that it's such a small part of a woman's life that if they can get some really good changes during this period of preconception, during pregnancy, and then, that 6 months post-pregnancy where their body's healing, it can really reduce a lot of the complications that happen in their 40s and 50s, women getting high cholesterol, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure. If they can make those changes and avoid all the excess weight that we see this trend happening after women have children, if we can avoid that by making some good changes, sometimes gestational diabetes is like a perfect opportunity to then reduce the risk of those things happening.
I think
they
you kind
change.
of pass that on to your children, that knowledge as well. Don't you?
And change everything for the whole family, make everything healthy for the whole family. Women learn so much about nutrition when diagnosed with gestational diabetes, and they learn how to create a healthy, balanced plate or meal. So then when they have to start feeding their children when they're 6 months and they start introducing solids, they have heaps more of an idea of what is healthy for their child as well. Like, they might be like, oh, probably shouldn't just give my child some, some of that cereal, what is it, Far X cereal that kids get first, because that's just carb. Like, how is that? My dietitian Simmone talked about how that's not very nutrient dense. Maybe I need to introduce some iron-rich foods here and some protein as well. And yeah,
it's fascinating.
You're so right. It's an opportunity to level up health, isn't it? I was thinking that earlier as you were talking as well. Love that. Yeah. Love that.
Are there any after effects on your body postpartum, please? Somebody said who has had gestational diabetes.
Yeah, sure. So I think we've talked a little bit about that. There's this increased risk of metabolic syndrome, the high blood pressure, the high lipid fats, the high cholesterol that can occur, the increased risk of heart disease. But I think what probably is important to cover here is that we need to stay on it, because in the NHS, women have their baby and they're like, okay, see you. There's not a lot of support. So I really often encourage mums, at 6 weeks, go see your GP if they haven't booked you an appointment, get your blood sugars checked, and then regularly check them every 6 months. Even if you have a glucometer at home and some testing strips, do your blood sugars for a week. See what's going on.
Yeah, you can get them for like 20 quid from Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. See what's going on. Check your blood sugars and see how you're getting on. Because if you start to notice your blood sugars are creeping up again, then you know what you can do to make changes and hopefully delay and avoid that type 2 diabetes, progression.
Love that.
That's really helpful. Okay, final question, because we are running out of time. Is there anything you can do during pregnancy to help avoid gestational diabetes? I know we've kind of touched on this, but maybe summarizing this.
Sure. So again, going back to that original thing of exercise, you can reduce your odds of developing gestational diabetes by up to 46% by exercising before pregnancy and during pregnancy. Other things that you can do are making sure that you're not eating naked carbs or lonely carbs. You're having protein and fat with your carbohydrate foods. Another thing to think about is making sure that you're taking the right supplements for you. And like, for example, myo-inositol is nearly as effective as metformin for women who have a history of polycystic ovarian syndrome in pregnancy in helping balance blood sugars. So, like, taking that supplement might be the difference for you in getting diagnosed with gestational diabetes or not. But you need to work with a health professional like myself to understand all that or to see if that's what you need in your diet. I guess other things is like making sure that you're choosing lower GI carbohydrates or low glycemic index carbohydrates. That's like rather than eating lots of processed foods, like that you're choosing barley or quinoa as your grain rather than maybe white rice, because that's going to have a better impact on your blood sugar levels. Thinking about the portion size of carbs that you're eating at a meal. Instead of having half your plate as rice with your stir fry, that you have a quarter of your plate as rice, and then you have more protein and that and more vegetables with your meal. So it might be simple things like that. It might be that you start eating regular meals over the day rather than just eating 2 big meals, because that will help keep your blood sugars more balanced, particularly in pregnancy where we get lots of swings and peaks and troughs in blood sugars.
That's so helpful. We have 60 seconds left. So and thank you I found that so insightful.
Absolutely.
I just feel like I am armed with everything I need to know if we're fortunate enough to have another little one. Lastly, Simmone, where is the best place for people to reach out to you if they want to know a little bit more?
So, my Instagram page, which is at Gestational Diabetes Dietitian, all one word. So check me out on there. There's a link and you can download my free resource, which is about how to lower your blood sugars in pregnancy. So, download that, get on my email list, and you get lots of free information. At the moment, I offer a 6-week program where women can sign up and work with me for 6 weeks. They get daily chats with me, accountability, goal setting, transformations of like reducing stress, reducing that feeling of overwhelm and anxiety of having gestational diabetes to actually feeling empowered and encouraged and know what to do to be healthy. So, how to keep their baby healthy. So all of those things are what you could get by working with me.
Amazing, Simmone. Thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Thank you so much, Simmone.
You're welcome.
And look at that. Bang. We have never finished bang
So
on time.
Look at that.
Well done. That was brilliant. Thank you so
goodness.
much for being so aware of dads in that.
I know.
Because we've had
The Secret Life of Dad.